like even you can find those same futuristic, I would say, technologies, like within, like any area. Yeah. So this can be within AI, this can be within space tech, this can be within robotics or intersection of those. Yeah. So you can very well imagine an intersection of space and robotics, or doing robotics in space. Like obviously, manufacturing things in space is, I would say, it's already happening, not only at International Space Station, but doing it, like autonomously in, I would say, small factories which are being launched and then deorbited in a safely way. Like these are the
Is
things which
that
are happening.
happening
Yes, it is happening
autonomously?
autonomously. It's again, this is the beginning of this, but it is happening.
Space is the theme that just keeps coming up. It's captured our imagination for centuries, and the race is heating up again. We not only want to put boots back on the moon, but people are talking about Mars. Who knows where we'll end up? But for now, there are lots of really cool companies that are using space as a way to improve lives here on Earth. One of those companies is Frontier Space Technologies. They are basically trying to manufacture medicine in space. Sounds cool, right? Immediately, I had to find out more.
Aqeel. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Frontier Space. Essentially, we are sort of space engineering, a space biotech company. What we build essentially is the toolbox and the technology to perform in-space R&D and in-space biomanufacturing. So we have a in-space R&D vertical, so we work with biotech and biopharma to perform drug therapy R&D, or let's say on the biomanufacturing side, we develop sort of crystals or biologics in orbit down to Earth.
This seems crazy.
It is nuts.
Is that possible like today, or you're building the technology of the future?
It is possible today. The reason why it's becoming more accessible, and this is why we're positioning ourselves, to make it microgravity accessible, is because the price has gone down. The price into orbit has gone down due to SpaceX, and we're also seeing more and more competition in this launch market. That means, we can launch things into space at a current price point is about $4,000 per kilogram, right?
Okay.
And just to show how it's accessible, our first space mission is purely bootstrap. 10 years ago, you need a 10 million Series A to do that, which is changing now.
Have you actually reached space yet? And also, have you managed to get things back? Like, what does that re-entry look like? Because that's a very recent development when we talk about space tech.
Agreed. So, just put it in context. So when we started about 4 years ago, this is the first one that went into suborbital, so subspace.
This physical item,
yeah.
or the design?
This
thing.
actually been in stratosphere.
That's very cool. I'm just going to touch it.
Yeah, of course.
What do you hope this work will unlock? Like, why do you want to send bioreactors and mini labs into space?
We need to answer that question because it's nuts, right? The idea of like doing things in space. But I think the reason why we founded the company is that during my PhD, we actually launched the first prototype, which is this version.
This right here?
Yeah, in 2021. Cool. And what we wanted to do is make this lab in a box, we call it Space Lab, accessible into the market.
Can I touch this?
Yeah, of course. It's supposed to survive the rocket launch, so.
Yeah, oh, true. So when you say lab in a box, this is not what comes to mind.
So essentially it's a bio and wet chemistry lab that is fully integrated with sensors, thermal control, fluidics, all in a box. It's basically trying to get, things that you found in our lab, fluidics, microscope, package them and miniaturize them and make them autonomous.
Like, what goes on inside here that makes it attractive to pharmaceutical companies?
To be able to justify why we go to space, the key difference is really gravity on Earth and microgravity in space. When you don't have, or you take away the gravity force, things changes. For example, we've seen study that you get organoids kind of like grow themselves a lot better in a 3D shape because you don't have gravity kind of pulling it down. If you get much uniform crystals, you can make it much more concentrated, and that changes the application of the drug. So from IV for cancer treatment into injectables like insulin shots. And this is like the how do I say that, holy grail in biopharma, and this is what they're trying to do over the last few years, is moving away from IV into injectables. You know, we've never been able to turn off gravity as a fundamental force. You know, we've kind of mastered electric magnetic field. You know, this is where the space lab comes in, where we are able to do R&D quite quickly with our customer. We print our fluidics in-house, so we can really cater and being agile to our customer. But then using that learning in terms of like scaling up the manufacturing element. So the idea is that, okay, what can we learn, what drugs that is useful, and what can we then produce in space for therapeutic application. So that ways we can get some revenue in early, but also preparing ourselves to the point that in future we can use drugs that manufacture in space for therapy.
Okay,
It
that's
sounds
really interesting.
crazy.
I guess, like, how long would that take? And because lots of drugs have very short sort of lifespans, right? So does that come into it at all?
When you're able to crystallize drugs, for example, you can actually increase the shelf life.
Okay, cool.
So in a way, it kind of helps with like all the operation side of things. But in terms of like the process of manufacturing things, for example, we have two verticals, as I mentioned, the in-space R&D and in-space biomanufacturing. In-space R&D, normally, you know, around a week to a month is kind of like the timeline that we need to be able to grow the cell, to grow the crystals.
That's fully autonomous as well,
Fully
right?
autonomous, yeah.
So you guys don't need to be involved. You just sort of like press go
Yeah.
on a program.
Yes and no. I mean, obviously we need to keep an eye on it. But yeah, you're right. So it's kind of like semi-autonomous.
Yeah. Are you concerned about like regulatory sort of challenges? Like how does that look right now?
Yeah, so I mean, this idea is out there. So that means
Quite
that
literally.
quite literally, and that means that regulatory, it's a bit out in the open. So doesn't mean that we haven't start working on it. So we already obviously engaged with stakeholders. We understand that, you know, getting it certified for the health side is certainly important. On the space side, it's kind of covered. You know, we kind of know how to launch satellite, how to do it safely and stuff like that. It's the idea on the medicine side is how do we make sure that whatever we produce is translatable into therapeutics, or down the line being able to inject or use that as a drug treatment. But yeah, this is a conversation that we're having. We are trying to get our first simple systems of GMP qualified, just to sort of build the understanding and processes quite early on. The challenge that we face is that when, you know, people like in the biofield work with a microscope and pipette their sample, they don't think about what happened if I remove gravity, right? So there's going to be quite a big education piece. And this is what our biz dev have been working on, is how do we shorten the education piece cycle. And then the other part is obviously the cost barrier, right? As I mentioned, as you mentioned, you know, going up there and bring it back down. Although now the cost is going down, the first mindset in people perception is cost. So that's why we're developing our next product line, which is in the in-space R&D. It's called Space Lab Passive. To keep the cost down, it has to be completely passive. So we can't put, you know, this has a microscope. This has all the fancy fluidics. But what we're trying to do is that how do we make it into high volume enough where the cost per vial is reduced to £2,000.
Does this need to get any bigger to do that then? Or do you need to keep it small?
We need to work within the unit economics of like kilograms.
Yeah.
Our mantra has always been miniaturizing things. That is why we invested in like 3D printed microfluidics. So we can actually create, you know, we can actually pack a lot of microfluidic features in a very small format. So for R&D, keep it small, miniaturized. For biomanufacturing, it's all about economic of scale.
How many vials can go in this?
For this specific mission, is about 32 samples. For this mission that's flying on Monday, is about 50 samples. For the bioreactor, again, as I mentioned, it's about economic of scale. Like, what can we produce one type of bio, but justify the production volume. And then this will be going to space. This is exactly the same model that is going to be launching on Monday. That is with Atmos Space Cargo, and this is where we attempt the re-entry bid. So this will be our first space mission, but also we are on track to be the first of space biotech company to attempt biological re-entry, completely private on a commercial mission.
And so when we talk about the biology, what are you actually sending up?
We do have biological payload on board, so this will be sort of passive system. The idea is that we're testing sort of operation to be able to how do we control the biological from lab to space to lab, and this is what we're kind of trying to work out essentially. This will be with our partner, Imperial College London,
Cool,
and
okay.
they are sending a few biological materials.
So just like little bits of bacteria or something.
Yeah, exactly. So a bit of bacteria, a bit of yeast.
Cool.
So this is their expertise is in the SynBio
Yeah.
application. So using sort of fermentation to produce compounds. So for example, what we're testing in this flight, I can't remember how many. I think it's about 10 different species, and that every single species can produce different compounds. So for example, some species can produce biomaterial,
Yeah.
some species can produce medicines, some species can produce fuel. And obviously this is sort of targeting, when we go up there into Moon and Mars, we need the ability to grow what we need to sustain our presence.
Are you leaving the lab and the bioreactor in space and then somehow like extracting the output and then bringing that back down, or does it all need to go up and come back down?
So it's a combination of both.
Okay.
So we are partnering with our partners across US and European to be able to do in-orbit data processing.
Okay.
So we can actually take a lot of information from in space. We've also secured about $500,000 UK Space Agency grant to miniaturize our microscope. So
Cool. These things.
yes, but it's gonna be this big.
Wow, that's crazy.
It's gonna be fluorescent capability, which is not readily available now in the market, and that enable us to really understand what happened to the bio in orbit. But I think there's certain limitation where things that you just can't put it on space, right? For example, your genetic study or those kind of like larger facilities that you need to access on the ground. So there's value of trying to get as much as you can up there, but there's also value of bringing it back down.
You need to bring it back, yeah. Obviously, the hardware itself has come leaps and bounds in the past few years, but we're obviously experiencing a huge AI hype cycle. So are you using all of this information and feeding it into like a model that helps you make sense of it and helps you, I guess, like derive insights in which that you wouldn't have previously been able to do? Or is that just me feeding into the cycle?
No, it is actually an important part of the value chain. I think, as you mentioned, going up is going to be costly, right? If you can try to do as much as you can down, it's going to be better. So this is why we start partnering people who's going to be able to build sort of that digital twin or AI kind of model or MLM. So down the line is certainly something that we are looking at.
Is that the long-term goal for you? Like this idea of humans settling elsewhere?
Simple answer is yes. I mean, that's what kind of like motivated us quite early on, alongside the idea of like, if we can cure or if we can move the dial of cancer by 1%, I think it's worth asking question. But the idea is that the technology that we are building, the bioreactor, can actually support human settlements. If you start thinking about, if you need to bring supply all the time from Earth into space, it can get really costly. But if you can just bring, let's say, a few milligrams of microbes, grow them, and then get your fuel, food, that makes it more cost efficient.
Realistically, we're not we're not going to Mars in our lifetime, right? So how come you want to build this technology? What drives you to do this?
Actually, when I started my PhD, during the PhD interview, I was like, one of the things I said, I'm gonna start a company with this, because the idea is that we need to be able to understand what happened to biology if we're gonna have a chance to go to Moon and Mars, right? Because our biology is so intertwined with Earth, environment, gravity. So that's kind of like what motivated us when we kind of start doing this. Is like, how do we make this commercially accessible so many people can use it? And then the more we learn about this, the bioreactor technology, the idea of synbio, synthetic biology, this kind of thing, it's kind of like this intersection of different technology that really is quite exciting and paramount to us as a species.
How do you see the space tech ecosystem evolving? I suppose, like, do you think people will continue to collaborate when we exist in a world that seems to be moving in the opposite direction right now?
If you look at space has always been about collaboration. So if you look at the model that people have done, the International Space Station, despite conflicts on the ground, different nations still kind of work collaboratively, because I think space is actually quite a good model of diplomatic relationship. And by nature of that, and I think people who work in the kind of space industry are kind of a bit nuts as well. Like, you know, you're building technology that you don't see and you're just going to different planets. But the idea of collaboration has always been sort of embedded within the industry. So yeah, I mean, despite all the conflict, we still kind of like keep an open line.
Are we going to build on this like utopian like collaboration, or once we set foot on ground of a different planet, like, are we not just going to perpetuate everything we've done on Earth?
Yeah, so it's going to become a bit more controversial, right? So I think we are kind of seeing that a bit more now is when, if you look at the history, when there's new place, new resources, at some point it becomes a theater of war. I think what we need to avoid is use the learning that we have to mitigate that and not repeat the mistake of the past, right? And I think that's really, really important. It's kind of what we're seeing now as well in the space industry is that, okay, when people started the company, it's like, okay, how do I use climate tech? How do I improve resources, you know, using Earth observation data? But then because of the necessity to operate and get more revenue, it's becoming sort of dual use, right? Which is, you know, it's fine, it's okay. But I think we just need to be cognizant and understand you know, there could be parallel branches if we don't, you're not careful.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. Engines full power and lift off. Go Falcon, go Bandwagon 3.
Stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
Vehicle is pitching downrange.
Just days after we spoke to Aqeel and visited Frontier Space Technologies, they took part in their first orbital mission. Aqeel said it was a major milestone, democratizing space research.
I've learned that manufacturing in space opens up a world of new opportunities, from new medicine and materials to how we will potentially, maybe one day, settle elsewhere. But it also reminds us that innovation isn't just about the here and now, it's about the future and the world we want to build. The real question is, as we look to the stars, as we build amongst the stars, how do we also build a better world here?